Hi there, and welcome to my channel, Stock here. So today's video is less of a response and more of a warning. These particular subjects are not what I thought I'd be covering at the start of my channel, but they are personal to me, and so I find myself compelled to help other YouTubers sound the proverbial alarms, as it were. And I'm sorry in advance, this may get a little heavy, so I ask that you all bear with me. And for some, a little trigger warning. On June 6th, 2020, at around 1:15 in the morning, Daniel Hussein, a 19-year-old man with autism, savagely and brutally murdered two young women in Frayant County Park, Wembley. During his arrest and subsequent search of his bedroom, the police found a number of items used in occult practices, as well as a handwritten contract to the demon Lucivage Rockfocal. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. In the hopes to become rich and loved and to continue sacrificing women every 6 months in return for power. Now, before we continue, I have to stress a couple of things. Firstly, I'm autistic. It's not an excuse, nor do I use it as a label. It is what it is. Also, my view on the occult is simple. My partner is a practicing witch, and myself, I'm a spiritual naturalist pagan. I say this so that people are aware of my view right from the get-go. Having said all that, I don't believe that Daniel, being autistic, or even a practicing occultist, had any bearing on what he did, nor am I going to try and make excuses for him and what he did. What he did was reprehensible. Daniel became obsessed with far-right groups, which led him down the proverbial rabbit hole of the dark web. Like many young men and women, with or without mental disorders, there are people out there who will and do feed and influence the vulnerable and marginalized in our communities. This practice is not new, nor is it an isolated incident. This kind of tactic has been used for decades. The suicide bombers in the late 80s and 90s were young men who, through their religion and political hatred of Western culture, are promised a place in heaven through martyrdom. Two of the most devastating examples of this horror is 9/11 in New York, and then in London on the 7th of the 8th, and the list goes on and on and on. They weren't the first, and they're certainly not going to be the last, but they are the most horrific, and all performed by men and women of a faceless few. In more recent years, with the emergence of ISIS using various social media platforms and the dark web, we've seen a rise in teenagers being drawn to the extremist life, both males as holy warriors and females as brides. And then, more recently in New York, the rise of QAnon conspiracies and the Proud Boys movement, and even a deranged president filling the heads of everyday people with lies and half-truths, which led to an attack on Congress on January 6th. Here is an excerpt by, and I apologize for the pronunciation, Daniel de Simone. It's part of an article written for the BBC News. Quote, "There is a crossover between elements of the extreme right wing and certain forms of Satanism and the occult, meaning Daniel Hussein's ideological journey is perhaps less unusual than it might seem. Misogyny is also a common theme of this world, generating a deeply toxic blend of beliefs." I have to say this before we continue reading the excerpt. This kind of toxic belief is called incels, and those groups who believe that men, and mostly women who have normal sex lives, are to blame for them not having any at all. One such channel that springs to mind is BGR, Biblical Gender Roles, and the occult channel EA Questing is another. These channels are toxic and should not be taken seriously. But I digress. Since 2019, 6 young men, 5 of them teenagers, have been convicted of extreme right-wing terrorism offences connected to a violent form of Satanism. 2 neo-Nazi groups recently banned as terrorist organisations have prompted the ideology. One boy who was convicted in 2019 of planning a terrorist attack had written of hunting for women in a forest, in a disturbing echo of Hussein's crimes. Some people start with far-right ideology, explore the extreme right, and wind up typically via the culture of certain online spaces influenced by cruel and violent occult ideas, encouraging the very worst of human nature. End quote. It has to be said that while not all religions promote this kind of toxic far-right ideology, the same can be said for most pagan and occult communities. It's unfortunate that nearly all groups have their extreme sides. Even the atheistic community isn't immune to toxic ideology. Now, let me be perfectly clear. As previously stated, neither autism or the occult are to blame for Daniel's actions. Not every person on the spectrum is a killer, just as not every neurotypical is a killer. The same can also be said for people in organised religions, pagans, occultists alike. They're not all killers. In fact, the majority of heathens believe in allyship, equality, and inclusivity for all. But like with other belief systems and religions, there will always be those who will move towards the extreme, and equally those who will take advantage of the vulnerable. So who's at fault? Is Daniel? Or how about the authorities who failed him? How about his parents who didn't spot the warning signs? Are the sites and forums to blame? When you really break this tragedy down, yes, Daniel is to blame. He is responsible for his own actions, but at the same time, just because he is responsible for his actions doesn't mean he was not influenced by others. This influence is called Stochastic Terrorism. I'll leave a link down below as reference, but briefly, the stochastic process is a random model of terror attacks intended by the random nature of their timing and targets to excite a generalized fear. The stochastic terrorist, in this context, does not direct the actions of any particular individual or members of a group. Rather, the stochastic terrorist gives voice to a specific ideology via mass media with the aim of optimizing its dissemination. In the 2017 book Age of the Lone Wolf Terrorism, criminologist Mark S. Ham and sociologist Raymond Spage, I do apologize for mispronouncing your name. Anyway, they discuss stochastic terrorism as a form of indirect enabling of terrorists. The lone wolf terrorists are indirectly enabled by conspiracy theories circulated in the mass media, especially by high-status political or religious leaders. In the case of Daniel, it would seem that those far-right extremist groups were the influence and enabling presence in Daniel's life. One such group is the Order of the Nine Angles, a neo-Nazi group that has been linked to numerous terror attacks. One such planned attack was of a 16-year-old boy from here in the UK. He's the youngest person to be convicted of being a terrorist. The prosecutors believed he was partly influenced by the order and that he wanted to alter himself in line with their teachings. The prosecutors go on record as saying the Order of Nine Angles, quote, self-consciously, explicitly malevolent, and the most prominent and recognizable link between Satanism and the far right, end quote. Unfortunately, they're not the only ones. Every religious and non-religious group has their dark sides, their version of the extreme right ideologies. You don't have to look very far. Christianity is the main one that comes to mind. With so many denominations, sects, and cults, the religion is rife with right-wing extremism. Earlier this year, evangelical churches managed to have the HB 896 law passed prohibiting abortions. Abortion is one of the most divisive issues in the United States, with opponents citing religious belief to declare it immoral. In most cases, this law removes a woman's right to their own body. The same groups say they're pro-life, while at the same time endorsing capital punishment and guns for all. And wow, nothing says pro-life more than an AR-15 assault rifle. How about the same groups making prophecies about a racist bigot ex-president and raising him up as their new messiah? Okay, so that last bit is a little inferred by myself, but nonetheless true. Or how about a young boy of 17 with a rifle who crossed state lines and killed 2 people because he was told that they were Antifa and that Antifa were fascists out to incite riots and destroy property, even though the name Antifa literally translates to anti-fascism, someone who is against fascism. So in closing, and I'm glad that you've all made it this far, but you're probably wondering, what has this got to do with me? Why should I care about these fringe far-right groups? They're not bothering me. You could be saying to yourself, I'm just an average Christian, pagan, or atheist who doesn't believe in God, demons. Oh, and that guy Satan is just a figment of someone's overactive imagination. Well, the truth is, at the end of the day, you don't have to. At the end of the day, it's your choice. At the end of the day, you do you. You do what you believe is best for you. And that is all anyone can ask. But if you can think about this, just this one point, unfortunately, with the advent of the internet and social media, people are more connected now than they've ever been. And those fringe far-right groups who used to remain in the shadows are now more active, their voices louder, their hate speech and extreme ideologies are ruining the right for everyone to believe in whatever they want and to be who, and in some cases, what they want. Thanks for watching, and remember, being kind and giving respect makes us stronger.